Get a thumbs up. Thank you. Perfect. Cool. Great to be here. Got to say, slightly nervous. This is my first presentation to a bunch of people outside of my normal day-to-day at Airwallex. It's usually a bit more one-to-one with anyone in sales. So I'll try and make it my best presentation yet. But first and foremost, before I start, should probably say a big thanks to Laha as well. You can see that, or hopefully you can see that the slides are designed beautifully here, and that was in no part because of me. That was all Laha. So thank you for doing that and for inviting me onto this stage to run through myself and my sales process and how I would go about setting that up for your business or any business, and think about that mentally. So for today's session, what I want to run through is 6 topics, and again, the slides, there's the animation, there's everything going through, is run through a little bit about me and my sales journey, my favorite framework that I use for everything sales, run through the sales cycle, ideal customer profile, the basics of messaging and discovery call. So right through from, understanding how long it actually takes to sell my particular product or service, right down to I've got someone on a phone call or I've got someone in a meeting, how should I approach that situation? So, may as well get to the quickest part and cut straight in, is about me. How did I find my way into sales? So like a few of us probably on this call, we all had some very windy career paths, mine exceptionally so. I actually finished up at ANU in, when was it, 2018, moved to Sydney, got a role in an exec search firm or a retained search firm for startups and Series A, Series B companies that were looking to hire their first head of marketing, head of sales, first salespeople on the ground, etc. What I slowly come to find is that I think recruitment definitely has a place in this world. It's just that I was finding cool people doing cool things and putting them into even cooler places. And I wanted to be that cool person doing cool things and getting put into cool places. So I made the switch into sales, into a company called Usabilla, which has since been acquired by SurveyMonkey. So I saw the transition from a scrappy 150 person team that was located in EMEA, US and Australia, and saw that, I guess, scale from 150 to 1,500 people in one massive global organization. And the tools and the sales process and everything that came with, it was just like a huge shift mentally and also in my day-to-day role. About 18 months into that role, I was approached by Airwallex to come in and become one of their first outbound sales team members. So I jumped at the opportunity to do that when they were at about 500 people. And then, sorry, I've just got a notification on my computer to actually update my device. Not going to do that. So I was approached by them, saw it at about 500 people, entered the business. We're now at about 1,300 people today. And I've had multiple roles going through. So gone from starting in outbound sales into building what would be known as an SDR team or sales development rep team, and now looking more or less into global revenue operations, which I'd split into 3 categories. It would be like finance, sales operations, and enablement. So what money are we deriving from our customers? How do we incentivize our sales teams to go out and acquire new customers? Sales operations being, you require a whole specific tool set, whether it be your CRM, your outbound tools, your phones, etc. So how do we set up and connect that so that sales teams are able to actively achieve their pipeline goals? And then enablement, which is you have the commission structure, you have the incentives, you know the targets that you're going after, you've set up the tools. How do you train reps to be able to go forward, use those tools, and be able to hit not only their goals, but our goals as a company as a whole? Anyway, hopefully that explains a little bit about me, my background and reason, for talking to all you lovely people about sales on a Tuesday night. But let's jump in. And first and foremost, before I get into like sales cycle or anything like that, I like to go into my framework of how I think about sales. Whether you're just starting out or you're later in your career, I think this pertains to every aspect. And if you've ever listened to How to Get Rich, Naval covers this. If you've read Mark Andreessen's blog P Market, he covers this framework as well. and is actually cited for this framework first and foremost, but it actually wasn't him. Little fun fact there. It's the 4 kinds of luck. And what these 4 kinds of luck are is blind luck, luck by motion, spotting luck, and finally, luck finds you. If anyone has listened to Naval's podcast, How to Get Rich, the quickest examples would be here and how luck actually manifests. So you've got blind luck, which is you've won the lottery. You know, you haven't done anything to specifically have luck come and hit you in the face. It's just come and done it itself. You've got luck by motion, which is through excessive force and effort, you've kicked up enough dust that, you know, the odds of something happening in your favor are going to like increase by you just doing that motion. It requires a lot of intense effort to maintain that motion, but you would be able to effectively, you know, in sales, make bank by, you know, calling as many customers per day, sending out 1,000 emails. No matter how bad they are, you're eventually going to find someone that it fits. Spotting luck is, you know, chance favors the prepared mind, where you're able to see, you know, some form of luck happening. I think one of the best examples is trading. Commodities trading is probably a good one, where you notice that there is some severe weather patterns happening in Argentina, which is going to affect grain production. And you notice that if supply of grain goes down, demand's going to increase, price goes up. So you go long on grain or take long position on grain. Price eventually goes up, you sell out, you make a profit because of your knowledge of, I guess, meteorological events and maybe the, I don't know, geography of Argentina. Terrible example, but it's there for you anyway. And then finally down to luck finds you. It's that you become so well known for X in this example, or you become so well known as the best treasure hunter in the world that whenever a rich person is looking for this long lost treasure, they're going to approach you first. And you're going to be the port of contact, and you're going to seek wealth from them needing that item, and they will pay you to find it for them. This probably doesn't make sense, and so we'll tie back into this later, but I'd like to actually jump into the sales cycle and more or less understanding your sales cycle before we make our way down. Because I find that the first thing, or like, people never really ask when they go into a sales role or they start selling their own product, how long will it actually take me to sell this thing, to sell my SaaS product, to sell a bike, to sell my service? You know, a lot of people magically think that they'll, you know, whop a $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 price tag on something and it's gonna go flying out the door. It'll be a month-long sales cycle, happy days, make money from there, when it realistically isn't the reality for most businesses. So to understand this, I've employed some models, which is taken from the scienceofrevenue.com. This is by a firm called Winning by Design. I give credit to it because it's all open source, and I advise anyone to go and look at these models because they're absolutely fantastic. But you know, going back to how long your sales cycle, what this graph shows is from the right-hand side, you have no queue and no pay, or consumption, where you need to continually make sure that a user gets on your platform, is using your product and loves your product, that they're going to use it time and time again, and they will pay for consumption. You typically see this in 2 models. It'll either be, you know, amount of downloads per month. If you go above a certain amount of downloads, you need to pay for a subscription to reach the next amount. Or fintech is actually another good example where, or banking, where it doesn't cost you anything to stay with the bank. And they rely on you continually using their services to then be able to upsell you onto mortgages, home loans, etc. As we move further to the left, the sales cycle increases, as well as the time on contract and the costs of that actual contract itself. So for, you know, a lot of SaaS subscriptions, if you pay monthly, it's going to cost you probably less than software where you need to pay for an annual subscription, or software where a business would, you know, pay for 3-4 years to subscribe to your own service. So how I would categorize the difference here is you would probably have Salesforce, which would sit around, you know, the multi-year annual, whereas you would have HubSpot, which sits along the monthly. And so it's a more intense purchase decision to buy Salesforce than it would to enter a monthly contract with HubSpot, where you know what you're paying each month and you can disconnect at any time. So you know, the sales cycle there is shorter, sales cycle here is longer, but the deal cycle or the deal size actually increases at the same time. So, you know, purpose of all this is if your product is monthly, or if you have, I guess, more of a consumer-based product, the actual requirement to have salespeople is less and less needed because the economics don't work out as well. Moving on from the actual sales cycle itself, we then have what's categorized as the go-to-market model. And this is typically found by most, this is created by a EMEA-based firm or US-based firm. So they generally, you know, have increased contract values or number of deals per year just because of the sheer size and the amount of people that are located in those countries. But the truth holds the same here in Australia or in Greater APAC, for example. So, you know, most PLG products or product-led growth, where you go on, you sign up for a usage or a weekly or a monthly based subscription, you're not going to require as much a sales team to go out and be able to sell that, because at the end of the day, you know, it might only cost about $100 a year. And we'll get to this, I guess, in later slides. But if you're selling a product and it only has $100, it only costs the user $100 a year, you're a salesperson, you'll typically have like a quota of, let's say, $300,000 per year. You would need to bring on 3,000 customers to be able to reach that quota of 300K if your average contract value was $100, which it just isn't feasible. You'll be making a lot of calls and sending a lot of emails, and hence why marketing is actually more responsible for bringing on those clients rather than a single person calling up and getting people to test out the product itself. Whereas meanwhile, if we move along the stage and the annual contract value, and let's say that your product was, the average contract value was $5,000 a year, and you need to make that 300K quota, it would only take you 60 clients, or having to bring on 60 clients who are willing to pay $5,000 a year for you to be able to hit that quota and be able to hit the revenue targets to make that economically feasible for the business. So, kind of given a brief overview of like the go-to-market model and your actual business cycle itself. And the end state where this ends out is understanding your quick math behind your sales cycle. And again, this flows down the line when we get into messaging, etc. But when you go, you know, into any sales role whatsoever, you need to work backwards from the outcome, which here it's gone above 350 in a year. And you need to figure out, okay, how many prospects do I need to contact per day? How many people do I need to respond to me per day? How many of those responses are going to be interested? How many are actually going to show up to a meeting? How many will actually have a need from that meeting to be able to make up the pipeline I require, which in this circumstance is 1.7. And if only 20% of those deals close, I would have I'd make $351,760 at the end of the year. So realistically, working back and figuring out all of the different input metrics to make your targets or hit your targets at the end of the day. Cool. Bit of a bigger slide there, bit of a bigger read. And there's more, I guess, points lobbed onto that. You'll have a lot of people who ask, you know, is it really that easy? And the answer is no. You need to, before you even get to a stage where you can understand your, like how many prospects, how many respond, etc. There's one important point, which is your ideal customer, or understanding your customer. Because when it comes to like a lot of salespeople, they enter an organization, they go, you know what, I'm just going to bang out as many calls. I'm going to send as many emails. I'm going to meet as many people. I'm going to be able to sell this product. And I, you know, just need to hit these specific numbers to be able to hit this goal. And then I always ask, why would you pitch a product to someone if they don't even know, or they don't even know what you do? And this falls over for a lot of people, right? Because you expect that going in, like, you just need to understand every aspect of that person, how they run their day-to-day, how they're incentivized, why they would actually bother going into a conversation with you in the first place before you even start to think about actually selling to them. Because, you know, if I'm trying to sell a product to you that I have absolutely no understanding about, and I have no understanding about what you do, and we get onto a call and I try and pitch it to you without understanding, you're probably going to not want to interact with me as a salesperson or any other salesperson who doesn't really care what you do. And to break my rule at the start, so sorry, Aloha, I'm swearing, that doesn't really give a shit. So to understand a person and go in and understand them, the biggest question I always ask is, who am I selling to and what are their incentives? What actually drives this person? What do they get out of a conversation with me? Like, why would they be sitting on a call, listening to me crap on for 30 minutes over a product when they could be doing something else with their day? And I've boiled it down to 3 things, 2 of which are common, 1 of which isn't as common as some of the others, is the reason the incentives that most people follow. And it comes down to time, money, and fame. So time would be classified as quite an easy one. You'll save X amount of hours in your day by purchasing our solution. Brilliant. You can actually quantify the time, and leads on to the second point of money, which is you'll save X amount of dollars from doing this. You know, if you switch over to our service, you will save 4 hours a week of manual effort. Your time is worth $50 an hour. You'll save $200 a week. Times that by 50, and that's quite a fair bit of money. But the last point people don't necessarily cover is fame. And I would say fame comes down to when you're selling into B2B, it's their incentive of staying in an organization. They want to get promoted. They want to look good for the projects that they work on. So realistically, targeting is like, okay, is what I'm doing going to make you famous within your particular organization? Is you implementing this tool to save the company hundreds of hours a week going to make you look really, really good? Most time the answer is yes to that one. But sometimes people don't want that fame, and that's quite all right. And the best example I could give of how to build an accurate ICP or ideal customer profile is one that I found from Lessonly. Lessonly is a US-based sales enablement tool for all who don't know or haven't heard of Lessonly. I think they were actually acquired by Seismic. I'll need to check my facts on that, but they were acquired last year. And they go through, and this is how they define their ICP. Now, most businesses would start and just say, hey, they work in a particular industry, they have this job title, fantastic, that's our ICP. Whereas they take it the next step further and they go, okay, like, I'm going to build an entire profile around this particular user or this particular subset of users, give them a name, and go through their job role. How long have they been in that role for? How many people are they managing? What's their actual buyer role? Are they going to be a buyer within the organization, like someone who effectively signs the dotted line? Will they be an influencer in that scenario? Would they maybe have economic decision making, but not the actual buyer? So there's many different buyer examples in there. What industries? And I like most of all how it's like even meet Cynthia. So giving her a personal aspect, giving people a personal idea of the day-to-day, how they got into that role, why they do what they do, why they should care about that particular person when selling to them, and try and understand them more and more so that when they get into a sales conversation with someone similar to the Cynthia profile, they're able to align and understand their needs and their goals going forward. And more importantly, ask about their daily tasks. Is this similar to, others? Are you, regularly coaching reps or on sales processes and skills? Is this taking a long time? Because we see others, within the software industry who have similar problems to you, Cynthia, and this is what they do. So really being able to dive in deep and understand that, and then even go in depth into what are the KPIs and success metrics there, which is revenue goals, win rates, average contract value, rep productivity, attrition, and these can be taken across any industry, any particular profile in an organization, whether they work in HR, finance, sales, tech, product. Even the founder has a specific profile in there of like starting out their business and what they'll be looking to do with that and what their goals are, depending if they're more technically skewed or more of a commercial founder going forward. I do think though, however, this probably misses one point overall, and it's that fame piece, right? And so going in, you go, okay, her 5 success metrics are there, but because Cynthia is the director of sales, the end goal is if her salespeople are more productive due to the platform that they're using, Lessonly, and able to understand the product more, then theoretically they're going to close more deals. If they close more deals, the company is going to make more money, and the rep themselves is going to make more money. If the rep themselves is making more money, Cynthia is going to be making more money, because a director of sales is generally tied to their team and how much money they're making and how much they're achieving. Because if they're achieving 70% of quota, Cynthia is going to get paid a whole heap less than if her team is hitting 150% of that particular quota. And so going down into the fame piece then, and like to, I guess, close that out, is if her team is making more money, she's making more money, everyone's hitting their targets, overachieving their targets, she's going to be looking like the greatest sales director of all time. And so tying your product back to how you can make her the greatest sales director of all time is really a massive part of the sell and expands across multiple different industries. Oof, I feel like I'm just going on a bit of a tirade here, so feel free to anyone butt in or post comments, anything like that. Hopefully this is hitting the mark with everyone. Before we, I guess, get into, actually, no, let's just go straight into the next step. As we go through, we've just understand our sales cycle, you understand your ICP. The next is, how do you connect with that ICP? And most people generally ask, like, how do you make your messaging resonate with your people? I need to send X amount of emails. I need to make X amount of calls. I need to be able to have people engage with me. I'm seeing low response rates. People, like, if you're cold calling on this call, can be a little bit frustrating at times. But how do I get people to actually engage with me? And if anyone's ever done marketing 101 at university, like I did, hopefully you'll remember the AIDA model. So put simply, awareness, interest, desire, action. It's been plugged in textbooks. I think it was like since the 1890s or early 1900s, but it's always been used to describe the marketing funnel of how people go from being aware of your product to taking action of buying or not. And so you can use this exact formula for any of your sales, outbound or outreach in particular. So, you've got awareness is why I specifically messaged you. Interest is why I thought this would be of interest to you. How we can help you and have helped others. Desire, if you've seen other use cases and examples and they see those examples working for other companies, it's, pushed up, I don't know, it's help them save money, help them save time by X percentage, then they might actually see interest in having that conversation. And then finally, action is this worth speaking about? And so I was actually hoping that Dan was going to be on the call for this one, Alaha, but he wasn't in the end. So I thought I'd put together an example of what it would be like if I went through and wanted to message Dan about Airwallex at the moment. And so quite simply, as a cold email, it would go like, awareness, hey Dan, been following you on Twitter for a while, love watching the Earlywork journey from the sidelines and your glorious shit posting. Like, if people aren't going to see that I've actually personally reached out to them and I'm aware of them from that, I don't know what's going to work. Interest, noticing you had raised funding recently, congrats. Curious if you face similar challenges to other tech community founders we work with who had also raised significant capital from Australian VCs. Where their interest is going to lie in the actual messaging, why they would want to proceed forward and keep reading and figure out like how I can actually help them based on their situation. Desire is like, typically we see founding teams who raise significant capital who lose around 3 to 6% in bank fees from Swift fees to receiving the payment to foreign transaction fees, blah, blah, blah. Desire, how this is positively going to help you. And then I've kind of put desire as well into the last point, which is we're working with XYZ who solved this recently. Would this be worth a conversation? I don't know about anyone else on this call, but you've probably received a whole slew of sales emails in the past. And a lot of them are like, hey, can we have a call at this time on Thursday or this time on Wednesday? And you kind of sit there and you go, nah, bro, like I don't want to be, doing that. You're kind of forcing me into an action. Whereas this action is more considerate, it's more neutral language. It's asking, would it actually be worth a conversation to that particular person? And with any messaging like this, I've seen about a 22% response rate at scale, which is very, very good for one-to-one. When I entered Airwallex, I think we had about a 3 to 4% response rate on a lot of our outbound emails because we were trying to automate the hell out of everything. And so rather than automating things, it's really about quality, and that quality of outreach to engage with people, make them understand that you're reaching out to them for a reason, and not go for quantity, which is where you're letting motion come into play, or that luck by motion side of things. And at the end of the day, I said 22%, and that's because no matter how good your message, not everyone's going to be interested. It's just a fact of anything to do with sales. With no matter how good your messaging is, no matter how much you know that person, no matter how desirable you can see this being for them, and it's going to work, it might not just be something that they have budgeted for that particular year. It might not be something which they have the authority to make the decision over. So you've ended up targeting the wrong person because they might not actually work in that area. They may be too junior. They may actually be leaving the business in 2 weeks' time and going to another business. They may not have a need because they think they've already solved the problem, or they know that they've already solved it better than they could see that you could. Or timeline, which is they may have this mapped out, but it's 6 months away from now. So it's not even worth going into a conversation because they're not just there yet. And that's okay. I don't know how much anyone here looks into sales or sales methodologies regularly. I've just used BANT as like a qualification metric that sits through there, but it's pretty pertinent across the full sales cycle. They're either going to have budget, authority, need, and time, or they won't. And if there's not one of those, they're probably going to fall over from there. So for instance, if they're the right decision maker, they do have a need, they know the timeline, but their finance team won't allow them to purchase any new tools that year, it's probably not worth having a conversation. All right. Let's say that they actually are interested in going forward, having a conversation with you. And one of the more important parts of any sales call or any meeting that you've generated, any interest that you want to show, is from the discovery call, i.e. the persuasion part of any conversation. And I know I've been talking at everyone for probably about 20 minutes so far, but I'd like to pose a question to the audience, which I always get some mixed results when I've asked teams in the past about this. But how do you convince someone your option is the best going forward? So I'll rephrase, how would you convince someone that your option is the best going forward? I'm actually going to read some of the context. No comments, guys? Do I have to hint? Show evidence of it working, ask them about their specific problems. All right, you guys already got it. Solve their biggest problem. Don't we all wish? Paint a picture of what they're going to experience, pain problems. There's some good ones in here. Ask how much solving the problem is worth to their business, outline alternatives, make the loss of not doing it real. There's actually like a lot of the answers that everyone's providing in here is what I would recommend as well. So, I mean, we can just skip to the end of the presentation. I can stop talking. Only joking, going to go through. But I saw this tweet and I said, you're right, but I saw this tweet a while back and it really resonated with me. If you replace the word in there, founder, with salesperson, this is what 99.9% of people will do in a conversation. They'll sit there, they will pitch you all their problems and then wait for you to make a decision on that, which isn't exactly the case. Persuasion is just asking really, really good questions and asking more questions and understanding their problem to a point where you ask so many questions that it gets to either a decision of, yes, this would be viable, or no, it doesn't fit our current situation. And most people will say like sales isn't really all that binary, or like dealing with people, talking with people all the time, trying to get to the decision isn't. But if you ask the right questions, you can generally ascertain whether it's like, yes, this is going to be something of value, and they will convince themselves into it being of value for them, or no, it's not, which is actually a perfectly acceptable answer, because it's the ones in the middle that really kill your time. They're the ones that is going to take up time because of indecision. They need to get back to others. They can't actually, they don't actually have the budget, or even better yet, like a lot of people don't actually like to reject others. We see it in our everyday lives. People won't tell you no to your face. They will tell you no via like Slack or email or something like that. When they don't know you, there's no real incentive for them to tell you no, and there's no incentive for them to tell you yes. So they'll just leave it halfway in the middle, leave it hanging, and that can cause some various problems to people. So going back onto asking good questions is, I've kind of broken it down into 4 parts. You have your situation questions, the negative impact questions. I can't remember who in the chat said, like talk about the loss that they would receive from that, but that's kind of the negative impact. Your solution questions, what are they looking for in a solution? Decision. So in situation, it's like, what are the problems they actually experience today? How can you find out more about those problems? And how can you figure out the full extent of those? Is it personal? It could be personal problems. It could be business problems. It could be business and personal. And there could be a few mixed as why they're actually talking to you. Negative impact is kind of the hardest one, because you need to figure out their situation before you ask them, okay, if you are continually, if you want to do Y, but you're using X, then what happens if you keep using X? Like, what happens if you keep doing what you're doing? Is that going to end in the result that you want to happen? Solution is, what are they actually looking for in an ideal solution? Does your product fit their dreams of what they're looking for? Or do you need to lead them down a path where, you go back to your situational questions of, you need to understand their situation more before you can actually pitch and go through with the actual solution, or figure out what their solution is, or help them craft what that solution could be, down to decision, which is the most important one. That binary yes or no is, can I actually solve their problem, and where do we go from that step? And I tried to make a slide with a million different questions on it, but there's honestly so many different questions you can ask at so many different stages that it's probably not worthwhile in this session going through and talking about all the different questions that you can ask. So some examples of some of the better questions, some of the ones that I like to ask is, out of curiosity, what made you interested in having a conversation with me? You're not asking them how their day was. You're not asking them about the product specifically. It's asking them like why they took up half an hour, 45, 10 minutes of their time to pick up the phone or jump in a Zoom and actually have a conversation with you. This comes down to the situation, or so the negative impact questions. Oh, you're using X, what made you start using them? Like, why, if you're in a competitor conversation and someone else is using a product, like a competing product to yours, understanding why they actually started using the competing product will give you an understanding of if you can move forward, or if they love that product so much that they're never going to move off of it. We see it all the time with, actually, funnily enough, at Airwallex with banks. People sometimes have been using their banks for 10, 15 years, and they don't realistically want to move off because of the customer service they receive, and the odds of them moving on to a new platform entirely is pretty obsolete. So you need to get to the decision of yes or no. Are they, willing to take that step, or are they completely stuck where they are, love what they're doing, and there's, no real need for them to experience and move on to something else? And probably my favorite one, which I mentioned before, is, you mentioned you wanted to do Y, but you currently can't with X. So what happens if you continue to not do Y? And it goes back to that negative impact statement. What happens if they don't move away from what they're doing? If Fred in accounting continues to use the current provider, which is taking up 10 hours, or let's say 4 hours of his week, and he has to continue doing those manual tasks over and over again. When does it come a point when he knows that he can cancel out all those manual tasks that he decides to switch across? Is it going to be now, or is he going to continue to do that for another 5 months before he finally cracks the shits and decides to, you know, move on to something more automated? And it's helping people see through your questions that, you know, they're in this current state, they're talking to you to get to the next state. Are they willing to get to that next state? And so, you know, going through that, persuasion overall isn't about telling someone why they should buy the pen. It's asking why they need the pen. Now, we go through all that. We have a good conversation. There is still 3 things which can wreck people overall in terms of how they present, how they communicate with others, how you might have even picked up some of this during my presentation with you guys. But hopefully not the tonality, but tonality can really be a killer. If you're sitting there and you're reading off a script, and if you sound like this and you keep reading it just doesn't really flow all that well when you sound like a robot. Where people generally hear you reading off a script, they'll hear you reading like robot, and you know it just doesn't present in a good light. Personal incentives is a second one that we all commonly deal with. When you're in sales, you're incentivized to make a sale. And most people will, when incentivized to make a sale, follow their own metrics, whether that be trying to, you know, sell them directly on the spot for a product that they don't particularly need, down to with an SDR team, a lot of comp or commission based on meetings. So their primarily goal is to get someone into a meeting, which then they get paid like a commission based on that. As soon as a prospect smells or feels that you are like pushing your incentives onto them, it can kind of be felt in that conversation. I've done it myself personally, where you end up like you're hounding for meetings, you want to book meetings, and then it just everything falls over because you've pushed so hard that you haven't actually listened to their customer and their problem. The final one, which is a bit of a contentious one too, is optics. So optics is, you know, jumping on a call. Do you have your camera tilted correctly, or are you sitting like this talking to people in the screen? Are you, you know, wearing your clothes from the night before or looking like you've just gone and hit a night out? Are you like presentable in some fashion? Because like when, I guess, communicating or selling with others, I think it's the first 8 seconds where people actually make their opinion up of you. And it comes down to the tonality and the optics side of things where, you know, if you look like you've just been out till 4 a.m. the night before and you sound like a robot, people probably aren't going to trust you during that conversation as an authoritative voice. So, you know, making sure that you're presentable, cameras on, everything like that is always a good thing to do. The only person I think can get away with that is probably Zuckerberg in The Social Network when he runs in his pajamas into a meeting. I guess when you make or become a billionaire, you can do that. But for all of us unlucky enough to not be that at the moment, yeah, optics, a big one. But overall, you know, I've covered a broad range of topics really, really quickly and happy to deep dive into this. But what I'm most, I guess, hope that you take away from this is that there's no silver bullets to actual like sales. Like jumping on this call, there's, you know, one trick that's ever going to make you $1 million. It's a farce. You're never going to enter a sales career and do well unless you know your product, you know your customers, you know your metrics, and you know your solution. Because overall, luck's always going to be involved as well. You know, whether you do nothing and you wait for luck, whether with motion, you send out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails and make heaps of calls, but you don't actually know who your end customer is. So you're reliant on a lot of motion to be able to, you know, bring in the revenue that you require. However, if you use motion and you know everything you've spoken about, you know your customer, you know your sales cycle, you're going to eventually come to spot luck. And then add on a bit of time, people will know your reputation and luck will find you. Because overall, you know, if you follow the first 2, you'll be earning with your time. If you follow 3 and 4, you'll earn with your mind. And with that, thank you.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Jake. I'm going to come back to the main screen. Sweet. We're gonna now open it up to audience Q&A. Thanks so much, guys, for your questions. Kicking off with the first question for Jake. Anonymous asks, why did you volunteer your time to help us develop sales skills tonight, Jake? What's the psychology behind that?
Is it based on the incentives, time, money, or fame? Well, it's probably not time because I'm giving up my time. It's probably not money because, yeah, Alaha's not paying me to be here. I'd say it's probably more on the fame side of things, right? So if we want to go back to the actual psychology of that and like me being open and honest with like any presentation that people do, it's, you know, it ended up, you go out, you meet more people, you do more things. I see some people leaving, etc. But yeah, it'll come down to the fame side of things as well as I think it's about time to give back to the community. I've been sitting in it for long enough, and Alaha's asked me to go and do a presentation. I thought, you know what, I know some things, happy to share. And if people agree, then awesome. If they disagree, then even better.
Great. Happy to hear that I influenced you. Um, the other question is, what are the signs that indicate you're ready to go from SDR to account executive or sales manager role?
Oof, that's a good question. So I would say just like in any role, you probably have, let's keep this very, very general. You've got A, B, and C skill set, and that role requires A, B, and C. Now, if you want to step into another role in the future, that might require D, E, and F. So it's on, you know, you, whether you take that from an SDR to an AE role, or you take that from an SDR to an SDR lead role, to figure out what D, E, and F is, and then go and get those skill sets so that then you can earn or effectively go to your boss and say, hey, I can do A, B, C, D, E, F. Why aren't I in this role? And then there's no argument sitting there and saying you can't do that. Whereas if you're nailing A, B, and C, and the next role requires D, E, F, there's kind of a risk taken on with that DEF side of things until you start presenting that. And that's why in a lot of sales organizations, they'll also do like SDR to AE programs where you might do 3 months where, you know, you're ready to be promoted and then you go through and you start actually closing deals, or you pick up a mentor in leadership and start leading the team more. And so it goes into that management style of role. But yeah, ABC, DEF would be the best way to go.
Sweet. The other question is more targeted towards early stage startups, and it asks any tips on sales business outreach when going from 0 to 1 customers, and hence don't have case studies to share for your startups.
Depends if you know what actual problem that you're solving for your customers. So if I would say you'd probably need to go back and have a look and figure out like, what problem am I actively solving? And have I validated this problem? And it's like something that is scalable. Because I think one thing I definitely missed out in this presentation is that 0 to 1 side, but the 0 to 1 side isn't realistically scalable. And like 0 to 1 is never as scalable. It's always about finding the problems with your messaging, finding the flaws, going from there. And once you do hit 1, that's when you can start actually scaling that message going forward. So I would say, you know, it would be less of going outbound and saying, hey, we could solve, here's 5 different problems, and figuring out that one problem that you know that you can solve for customers and focusing on that. And if at the end of the day, they're not actually responding, then hell, it's validated. It's probably not a problem that's worth pursuing.
Sweet. The other question is from Paul Simid to Rescue. Sorry if I butchered your last name. So if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, now is the time, or I'm happy to read it out as well. Okay, I think he's not on the call. He asks, because you're an Aussie in Australia, what is your best technique for building your pipeline and getting foot in the door?
Because I'm an Australian in Australia. I mean, I'd have a hell of an advantage if I was an Australian in the US. I know a few sales reps over in the US who absolutely kill it just because of the Australian accent that's there. This is funny because it falls into, I guess, a broader framework of each culture has a different way of like how they like to be sold to. Australian is more relationship based, particularly in like Sydney and Melbourne. I have my own theories on it, but my theory would be it's probably more around like private school, and like the people that you grew up with, you built a great relationship, you understand those people. It's very small. There's always tall poppy syndrome, which people kind of shout about here and there, but it's about more or less building a relationship and not actually trying. Gotcha. Building a relationship and not actually just trying to sell everyone like for everything. You've actually got to go through and do that. I would say if you want to do a cold sell, the best country to do it in my opinion is actually New Zealand. They're actually the best people to sell to. They're blunt, they're honest, they're open. And yeah, if you're absolutely full of it, they'll hand it to you. Whereas if you're selling into APAC, it's a very different dynamic. I would say outbound sales isn't as when I was selling at SurveyMonkey, I was selling into like India, Hong Kong, Singapore, and outbound sales wasn't really as it wasn't taken as well, and you get left on silence a lot because they're a culture that this is a mass generalization, so forgive me, but like culturally speaking, they don't like to tell you no. So they will just not tell you anything. And you'll even get to like the closing stages of a deal, etc. And rather than telling you no, like, sorry, they'll just completely just blank it from their mind because they don't want to reject you. And they do it out of love and everything like that. So I guess to round this out, an Aussie in Australia is be personalized. Don't go and smash the market as much as you can with messaging. Actually understand your customers, and hopefully everything I spoke to tonight will really help with that, because it's all about the long term. It's not about the short term 6 months goals. It's about the 18-month or the 24-month where you'll actually end up making the money from there.
Sweet. Time for 2 more questions. We have a question from Nathan about finding a problem to a product. Nathan, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
I'm not getting much love tonight, am I?
Okay. No, it's okay. I'll ask the question. So he asks, what do you do if you can't find a problem or they have a problem that you don't solve with their product, with your product?
Sorry, can you please read that again?
Yeah. What do you do if you cannot find a problem or they have a problem that you cannot solve with your product?
You can't sell to them. I would, yeah, that's one of those sinkholes of a conversation where if you're trying to sell something to someone and they don't require a solution and they don't have a problem, there's no point carrying it forward, because you're just going to be, I guess, chasing those people down for so long. And there's no actual solution for you to be able to sell, where even if you did sell, like the chances of that not working the way that they wanted it to is much higher. So I'll just say, cut ties, say like, this probably isn't going to work for you, walk away and focus your energy elsewhere.
Sweet. Ending with the last question, what's the best resources, books, or videos that you recommend our audience to live with tonight to learn more about like sales as a skill or persuasion?
Oof, interesting one. If anyone's in the Earlywork group, I posted this one up a little while back in terms of, I put forward the science of revenue, which is by winning by design in my slides tonight. They're a very, very good resource for sales frameworks thinking. If you're looking into actual sales methodologies, I've found in my journey that at the end of the day, it always comes down to a simplistic framework like BANT, and they all like contain the exact same, I guess, levers that sit in there. But you could study MEDDIC, MEDDPICC, Sandler Sales, NEPQ, a few methodologies out there. If you want specific books, Never Split the Difference is like the mecca for sales. FBI Investigator talks about negotiation. It's also a very, very good one for like what questions to ask and digging into those questions. I'm trying to think as well. I'll refer back to my Slack post. It's got all of them sitting in there. It's hard to think about off the top of my head, but we'll share the resources again. Or Alaha, if you could share that in any follow-up, that would be fantastic.
Will do. All right. And that's a wrap. Thank you so much,